I'd like to welcome everybody here this evening and thank you for coming to hear this Dharma talk by Rebecca Bradshaw. Most of you know Rebecca, and many of you have done retreats with her in the past, so we're happy you could come. We're also happy that new people could come and hear her talk this evening. Normally in years past, we've had this talk at the Dharma Center, and I'd like to welcome you on behalf of the Dharma Center. Because of the COVID, of course, we're doing it online. And next year, we're very hopeful to be back in May, having this talk at the Dharma Center and having the following retreat at the Medford Center where we have had it in the past. So I'd like to introduce Rebecca to you and say just a few words. She's extremely well known as an outstanding Vipassana teacher here in America, and that's for a really good reason. She's now a guiding teacher of Insight Meditation Society, which is better known to most of us as the IMS. And she has very important roles there and has had those roles for many years. And I think it's also important to know that she has very strong links with the sources of our tradition. The sources of our tradition are in Burma, and she goes there often and has taught there in the past alongside a Burmese Vipassana master teaching Westerners who come for a special retreat in January. It's held for Westerners. It's Sagai, a traditional center for Burmese Buddhist education, especially for monastics, but also for the laity. So it's especially meaningful that Rebecca is so well linked and so deeply committed to the Pali tradition and the wonderful teachings that come to us from Burma through so many teachers. I wanted to emphasize that this evening because I think that's quite unusual these days for American Vipassana teachers. Also, Rebecca has been teaching at this retreat here in Yellow Springs, the Yellow Springs area. Generally, it's held down by Cincinnati. But she's been teaching with us since 2006, so that's 15 years. So over those 15 years, she's been very consistent, and we're really delighted that she's been so consistent and made such a commitment to the center and to come down here in Southwestern Ohio and to give the Midwest an opportunity to have a real retreat in silence for a whole week or more. So we really want to thank you for that, Rebecca. And without anything further, I'll let Rebecca speak.
Thank you, Robert. So sweet. The feeling is mutual. I really love to come to Ohio. And I was sitting here a few minutes ago thinking about how I would usually come this evening and get dinner from the Sunset Cafe. Really good food. I don't know anybody there. I'm not trying to sell it, but I get dinner there. And then in the morning, I'd go walking in the Glen and such a lovely connection with all of you. So because of this coronavirus pandemic, this is the second year that we've had to do things online. And this year we even added a retreat for the weekend because of how important it is to connect with Sangha, how important it is to support each other. And virtually, we found that it's not the same as in person, but it does actually work. Something happens, something beautiful happens. So tonight's my usual Thursday night talk, and then the retreat will start tomorrow as usual, but just be for a weekend this year. It's a special day today. And the reason why is because the wood thrushes came back today. I heard my first wood thrush as I was walking in the woods behind my house. And I stopped and I listened and let myself feel my connectedness to the wood thrush and our coexistence together. And this actually has something to do with our talk tonight. Tonight, we're going to talk about different ways that we know the world, and our kind of primary way that we know the world, which is through the mind. through thoughts and thinking, but other ways of knowing the world that are more intimate, like sitting and just listening to the wood thrush song, feeling the belonging in this world with the wood thrush. So we usually start with a sitting. So we'll do that for a short while, a meditation sitting. And for those of you, I'm assuming there's a lot of you that have practiced a lot. Some of you might be fairly new, but I know there's a number of you who've practiced a lot. I'm going to mess with your mind just a little bit. Don't overdo it. But the question that I'm interested in is, how do we know things? How do we know the truth of things? How do we know the truth? That's what the Dharma is about, right? Dharma is sometimes translated as the truth. How do we know the truth of things? So I don't want you to think about that question. It's more like a koan. We're just dropping it in and maybe watch what happens during your sitting. I may have over-tempted you. When I say don't just sit and think about it, I may have over-tempted you, but that's okay. We'll just see what happens. So let us settle in. Allowing the attention to connect with our sitting form, body sitting or standing, however is comfortable for you. Lying down, some of you may need to lie down. But whatever posture, connecting with our body, our physical form, our sense experience. And so in some ways it's collecting our attention that might be kind of out and about, maybe high up in our body and our heads. So we're going to collect that attention, bring it, you could say, down into the body. We're going to allow it to travel down. So we can start with perhaps our heads, just noticing the head. That's often where we start. Inviting perhaps the forehead to relax by letting it widen. Maybe even suggesting that the eyes can settle back. They don't have to work right now. Allowing the jaw to relax, let go. Letting the neck lengthen by perhaps tucking the chin just a little bit. That's how the neck relaxes, by lengthening. And the shoulders to broaden and drop. Just an invitation, they'll do what they want to do. And the chest and abdomen to soften, the invitation for them to soften. The lower back, allowing it to drop just slightly towards the floor, towards the earth. Feeling the contact with the chair, the cushion, the floor, the earth. earth sitting on earth. Feeling the movement of the breath. So allowing the attention to settle into intimate contact with life through the movement of the breath or through the sense of the whole body sitting, the hands touching. A place of ease in the physical body that we can connect with, rest with, arrive with. What we usually notice is that other experiences arise, maybe thinking, maybe hearing the wood thrush, maybe sensations in the body that become predominant. Maybe an emotion pops up. And in Vipassana practice, we allow ourselves to greet this experience, to connect with it, whatever it is. See it, know it directly. And then often we return to this home base of the breath or the body sitting, hands touching. But we don't necessarily have to. We can just be with what is predominant. But if we feel scattered or confused, it's definitely helpful to reconnect with our home base. Can we think of practice as intimacy, friendly connection? Unconditional acceptance, allowing. Connecting with the deepest truth that all things change. Each moment arises and passes away. Letting go again and again. This is intimacy. You don't have to work at it. The moments pass on their own. You just receive the offering of the moment again and again. Large part of our practices is reconnecting when we've gotten lost in the stories of the mind. Our major um, place that the attention goes often when we're practicing. And then there's this beautiful gift of mindfulness kicks in and we wake up and it's like, oh, yes, here I am. Fabulous. And then we can come back to this more intimate connection with life through the breath, through the body sitting, hands touching, feet on the floor, whatever connection works well for you. It's kind of like training a puppy. It's called a puppy back. Give it a few pets, lots of love. Another interesting question. Why is the thinking mind so compelling? Why are we pulled into it over and over again? I know you're thinking about that. It's okay, we're near the end of the sitting. Or a corresponding question, why is it so difficult to stay anchored in the present? So we'll just take another minute or two enjoying the simplicity of dropping the drama with the thinking mind and connecting with the breathing, sensing body. We'll end our sitting with the wish and aspiration that our practice contributes to the stability of our mind and the opening of our heart, and that it spreads outwards and contributes to the freedom and well-being of all beings. So usually I take a minute for us to stretch after sitting. The thing about a webinar is you guys can stretch whenever you want to, different than usual, but we can just take a minute to move around just a little bit so that we have the ease of our body in order to sit for longer and explore the Dharma together. So how do we know what we know? It's interesting. The questions I came up with at the end of the sitting were not questions I had planned in advance. This often happens for me these days when I'm teaching. I have a plan and then I go a different direction. I'll try to get to the answer to those questions. But we'll start with, how do we know what we know? Which was our first question. And my hope is that we can understand the usual way we depend upon to know things, and to expand, or to get a taste of expanded ways of knowing that the Dharma offers us. And in some ways, this can be an introduction for the weekend that's coming. Of course, it can stand on its own too. I know that not all of you are coming to the weekend. So there is a study of how we know what we know. It's called epistemology. I am not an epistemologist, so I'm not a professional in this, but I got curious about this question recently. And modern culture, in which we are thoroughly immersed, is very much based in scientific materialism, and says that we know what we know through cognitive reasoning, through the mind, through the thinking mind. That we think, and that's how we know things. I think we've, ever since Descartes, the French philosopher in, what was it, the 1500s, somewhere around there, said, "I think, therefore I am." We've been a little bit caught in the cognitive mind. The supremacy of cognitive knowing, you could say. But perhaps there are other ways of knowing what we know and knowing the world. I came upon a quote by Audre Lorde, the self-described feminist, womanist poet of a few decades ago. I can't remember exactly when she passed away. She said, "The white fathers told us, 'I think, therefore I am.' And the black mothers in each of us, the poet, whispers in our dreams, 'I feel, therefore I can be free.'" I love this quote a lot. Now that I think about it and let it kind of percolate. The white fathers told us, "I think, therefore I am." And the black mothers in each of us whispers in our dreams, "I feel, therefore I can be free." So the direction we're going to be heading is a kind of knowing that's much more based in feeling rather than thinking. So let's explore a little bit more this bias that we have towards cognitive knowing. We're very embedded in this paradigm, and we're so embedded in it that we really can't see it. We have trouble realizing it. It's so taken for granted that we know things through cognition, through intellect, through analysis, through thinking. And of course, this is all very useful. There's no reason to throw it out. It's a very important human capacity that we have, this cognitive reasoning, this thinking. Why do we like it so much? That was the question I asked, right? Why do we like thinking so much? We'll get back to that. Rob Nairn said, "Just as we cannot weigh moonbeams, that doesn't mean that they don't exist. My perception is that by fixating on scientific method as the only authentic means of inquiry, we have trapped ourselves in a culture of scientism. We have developed a shrunken, limited perception of humanity, of our humanity. So we ourselves have become shrunken and limited. We have lost touch with much of our being, the spiritual part of ourselves. The result is alienation." So we're starting to see that perhaps if we feel like cognitive knowing is the only way to know the world, that there's a sense of alienation. I think we can really feel that for ourselves. Because we're one step removed when we're thinking, we're one step removed from that intimacy that I kept pointing towards. This intimacy directly connected with feeling, with a different way of knowing. Last fall, I was at a wildlife refuge, and there was a class of kids there. And I was really happy that they were getting out and enjoying nature, probably partly due to COVID, because they had to study outside. But I watched one of the leaders instruct one of the kids about what to do. And she said to him, he seemed kind of confused. Everybody else was pretty busy. She said, well, grab a pad of paper and a pencil and a ruler. And she hesitated for a minute. She wasn't sure what to have him do. And she finished by saying, and measure something. I was rather saddened by this instruction because to me, it had this sense of disconnect. I had wished that she had told him to go sit by the marsh, by the salt marsh, it was on the ocean, and feel what that was like, and smell the salt air, and tell her what he saw and what he learned through this direct connection with the salt marsh. The good news is that our practice opens us to these other ways of knowing. It opens us to ways based in the heart rather than the mind. Opens us to ways of connecting it through the body and all the way down, you could say, to the cellular level. And these are the ways of knowing that truly liberate the heart and mind. We have the support of the cognitive mind. We have the support of the teachings. Right now, I'm using the cognitive mind to talk to you. So we have the support of the frameworks like the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path and Four Foundations of Mindfulness. We have all of this support to help us make sense, to help us understand, or even to help point us towards certain places or ways to look. But the true liberation comes from this intimate connection with our own heart and our own body and our mind. There's a way we can be intimately connected with the mind too, not lost in thought, but present. So this kind of intellectual understanding, while it's helpful, usually isn't the way that transformation happens. We need a more intimate, closer, more direct kind of knowing to really free the heart and the mind. So as I said, cognitive knowing is kind of one step away from direct experience. It's a way of making sense or naming and labeling and then working with the direct experience, but it's one step away, and it's very much based on past conditioning, past experiences, assumptions, like all of our history comes with how we know things through the mind. And it's very prone, because it's so based on past experience, based on conditioning, it's very prone to delusion. It's prone to kind of making up what it wants to make up, reasoning how it wants to reason. And we've seen this. We've seen it in our own minds. We're seeing it like in the country. It's so slippery. The Vipassana practice points towards connecting very directly, moment by moment, with what's happening, whatever it is, and thereby developing a kind of intuitive wisdom. So it's different than an intellectual understanding. It's intuitive wisdom. And it's not reasoned out. It's not thought out. It's learned from intimacy with our own experience. It's felt out, perhaps, is how we could explain it. I teach meditation in Spanish, and sometimes trying to translate insight meditation has been difficult because there isn't this word insight in Spanish. So sometimes it's been translated as meditación intuitiva, intuitive meditation, kind of pointing towards what I was just describing. Also in Spanish, there's two words for to know. We have one word in English where there's two words in Spanish. So in Spanish, there's like to know a fact. So to know with the mind is saber. And then the other word to know, like to know a person, so a more intimate kind of knowing, is conocer, which you could translate, as to be familiar with. Knowing in the sense of to be familiar with. And so when we learn Spanish, it's hard for us to learn the difference because we only have one word. But we have saber, to know with our mind, and then conocer, to be familiar with. So in Vipassana meditation, we're more interested in the conocer, that kind of knowing, of getting familiar with. I've been interested in this for a long time. I remember as a child, we had a rather big backyard, and we had a lot of people in the house, a bit too many for my sensitive system. We had 8 kids and 2 parents and 5 cats and 2 dogs, and it was pretty rowdy. I would go out in the yard and I would find a thicket. I had my favorite thickets, and I would just go sit in the middle of the thicket and just kind of do what I wish that kid had done at the marsh, right? Just would sit there and just feel what it was like to sit there. And then when I got older, I used to, when our family would go camping, my dad would take us all camping. I would go to the edge of this field and just sit and try to find myself, as I call it, through this directed knowing of my sense experience. And I kind of knew that if I got lost in thought, that I'd kind of missed it. I would feel alienated. I wouldn't have found myself. But when I could hear and smell and feel the body sitting on the earth and see directly, then I felt like I found myself. So I've been at this since I was pretty young. Really drawn to this intimate kind of knowing. And I think, when I came to Vipassana practice, it felt so right to me, I think, for this reason. John Donahue, I think he's an at least Irish heritage writer. The senses are generous pathways that bring you home. A renewal, indeed a complete transfiguration of your life, can come through your attention to your senses. Your senses are the guides that take you deep into the inner world of the heart. The senses are our bridges to the world. Your senses are large pores that let the world in. By being attuned to the wisdom of your senses, you will never become an exile in your own life, an outsider lost in the external spiritual place that your will and intellect have constructed. The senses can warm and heal the atrophied feelings that are the barriers exiling us from ourselves and separating us from each other. We belong beautifully in nature. The human body is at home on the earth. It is a splinter in the mind that is the sore root of so much of our exile. So we develop this intimacy, this conocer kind of knowing through connecting with the body and connecting with our sense experience. And we have the 4 foundations of mindfulness that many of you are familiar with. And the first one is mindfulness of the body. And it's very extensive, many ways of knowing the body, of learning how to land here, connect here, come out of the fabricated world of the mind and into the intimate world of the body and the heart. I'd say even our cells have their own way of knowing. Sometimes I have the sense in meditation of when I'm learning something that it has to actually seep all the way down to the cellular level to really be known. Something like metta. Some of you have heard me talk about marinating in metta, letting it be felt all the way into the cells, or something like equanimity and peace. Like it's not just a thought in the mind, it's an embodied experience of rest, non-agitation, non-struggle, that we can feel all the way to ourselves. So let's see how deep this intimacy can go. The famous Zen master Dogen said, "Let things come and abide in your heart. Let your heart respond. Let your heart go out and abide in things." How there's no separation there, right? Let things come and abide in your heart. Let your heart go out and abide in things. Very intimate. And so there's a way then when we talk about this embodied knowing, this direct knowing, this intimate knowing, that we also talk often about the heart, rather, the mind we associate more with the cognitive thinking, and the heart with this feeling. And so part of this knowing and this transformation includes our emotional life. It includes all the emotions that arise in this human heart and that have their own way of making sense of the world. The mind makes sense of the world in one way. The heart makes sense of the world in another. And often with it being in this culture that worships more the cognitive capacity, the mind, thinking, intellectualizing, we forget the value of the heart. We deny the value of the heart and of emotions. It's not quite logical enough for our taste. And we can even see this sometimes in the way that meditation is taught, though not always, but sometimes. Mindfulness gives us this chance to connect with the heart, to connect with what we're feeling in a way that you could say leads to transformation rather than getting stuck. And we start to learn that the heart knows through emotion and that there's information in emotion. There's understanding in emotion when we're with it more purely and not lost in the stories of it. So when we're with emotions and our thoughts, it gets pretty messy, often pretty entangled, especially if they're afflictive emotions. It gets messy. But when we're with emotions through the body again, through this direct, intimate connection, there's a way that the emotions perhaps quiet down enough that we can hear the information of them. Like, for example, if we're angry at somebody, we get in the story, the story about what a jerk they are and how, they shouldn't have done that and disrespected me and I want to make them pay for it, or however the angry thoughts go. That's pretty messy and pretty afflictive, but when we feel anger directly and allow it to unfold, sometimes underneath there's hurt, or there's sadness, or there's understanding of what we need to do to take care of ourselves. It's a quieter voice, a kind of intuitive wisdom that comes through this direct connection. So why do we like thinking so much? Why do we flee from this direct connection? Well, mainly we like thinking so much. We love the cognitive mind because it gives us a sense of being able to manage or control the world. So the cognitive mind separates us out. Thinking separates us out so that we can look at what's happening and figure out how we can control it or manage it or make it be the way we want it to be or not be the way we don't want it to be. And we like that. It's attractive. It's like addictive. It's like, oh, we just hope that if we think enough, we can make things be the way we want it to be. That's the ultimate wish of the thinking mind. That's why it's so attractive. It seems to offer this promise because, yeah, we do figure some things out. And sometimes it's good to figure some things out. So again, it's not bad. It's just that when we get trapped in that way of knowing is the only way, it's alienating because it's separated out. So these other ways of knowing, we start to sense our embeddedness in the world, and the aliveness of the world becomes very obvious to us. And the beauty of this is this sense of homecoming, this sense of belonging, of finding ourselves, as I described it as a young teenager, and being a co-participant in the live world. Susan Murphy, an Australian teacher, says, the dearest thing about having this very body is how it establishes indissoluble kinship with all beings and all kinds of beings, as well as trees, oceans, and even puddles. So we feel our sense of kinship in this world. My sense of kinship today with the wood thrush calling its song in the woods. Richard Wagamese, an Ojibwe author, said, he's talking to an old woman, a spiritual guide. He says, what is the point of prayer and meditation? The old woman says, to bring you closer to the great mystery. He says, so I can understand it? She says, no, so you can participate in it. And then he says, overwhelming awe and wonder we feel teach us more than we can ever glean or come to know of things. In the presence of that wonder, the head has no answers and the heart has no questions. Isn't that a great sentence? The head has no answers and the heart has no questions. So why do we flee from presence if it's so beautiful? If there's such a sense of homecoming and belonging and wonder, really. The world becomes full of wonder when we get more intimate with it. It's a great quote. Hold on, where did that go? It's another Dogen quote. Oh, well, I can't find it. Why do we flee? Well, whereas the thinking mind gives us a sense of being able to perhaps control and manipulate the world, when we come closer to real, true intimacy with life, we see that it's uncontrollable. As I said in the meditation, every moment's arising and passing away. What was it like when I said that? We have some trepidation about uncontrollability. It isn't what we were looking for. It was interesting. Sometimes students say to me as they get, deeper into their practice, there was like, I didn't sign up for this. We sign up hoping we're going to get more control. And what we see is that the world flows on and on. So as we get closer to the truth of things, we come right up against our wish to be able to control and dominate the world. We see this individually, we see this societally, we see this on the planetary scale. And so you could say that a lot of practice is acclimating ourselves to this more intimate knowing and increasing our capacity to be able to hold all of this wild life. Because if we can hold it all, then it's okay that we can't control it. And we're not perturbed by all the change. Or we can escape to our thinking minds and try to control it, which we do a lot, and that's okay. We take our thought vacations, and it's okay that we do that, and we should be totally okay with that too. So we have to be careful. We're not like pitting the cognitive mind against the feeling heart, or this cognitive knowing versus the direct, more direct experience. They're both useful, and they're both a part of our human experience. So we really want to open to both of them. So it's okay that we think a lot. It gives us some solace, even though that isn't how it feels a lot of time. It feels like it brings up a lot of turbulence, right? But there's the solace that we might figure it out, that we might be able to make it do what we want it to do. So it's this process of learning to trust something deeper than our thinking minds, something that's more inchoate, more unknown, more unmanageable, deeper and truer. This is what we are doing. This is a great story. I'm not sure if it fits, but I do this sometimes, just throwing stories because I love them. There's a story of Daniel Boone, the explorer dude. He said, I never was lost in the woods in my whole life, though once I was confused for 3 days. There's something about kind of being open to the unknown. I think that's why I like this story in relationship. Something about kind of, an openness to learning from being around our environment around us, rather than having to have it all controlled. So this truth of embeddedness, one of my heroes is Robin Kimmerer. You've heard me talk about her before, some of you. She's the author of Braiding Sweetgrass, an Indigenous woman. I like to say what tribe, and I'm sorry, I don't have it on my paper right now. She's a trained biologist and a university professor, so she has the cognitive thing down, the scientific method down, and she respects it. And yet she has all this training, indigenous training, that is more like this way, this more intimate way I'm talking about, of being in direct connection with our environment and communication with our environment. So she understands both these ways of knowing. And she shares both freely. And that's why she's my heroine, because she has the courage to talk in the scientific community about how she talks to trees and how she communicates with trees and flowers and her understanding of the world on this intuitive level. She knows that we are embedded in the world and that everything is alive, and that she learns from the plants and the trees. And in one chapter in Braiding Sweetgrass, she has this description of different raindrops on different plants and the different ways the raindrops sound when they hit the water after they hit different plants. It's so intimate. It's so, like, you know, so closely paying attention. It's really beautiful. Dogen, again, if we want a Buddhist perspective on this, says, everything, both hidden and apparent, is sentient and is in the act of presencing with us and we with them. Everything, both hidden and apparent, is sentient and is in the act of presencing with us and we with them. So in the ethics of, this is why this is actually really important. In Robin Kimmerer's ethics, I call her an ethicist. She doesn't call herself one. But the ethics of care that come from this real direct and close connection, this intuitive heart connection with the world, drives her ethics of care. And we can see this in our own world, you know, on even, we could say, the planetary level, how kind of the dominance of the thinking mind that separates out and manages and controls is actually leading to the destruction of our planet, because it's not balanced. It's too separate to care enough. Like that mindset is too separate to care enough. And you know, when there's this emphasis on domination and control, which we see basically through international corporations more than anything, we see the destruction of our beautiful planet Earth, because we don't have the intimacy that makes the heart respond. So the primacy of the cognitive mindset, without being balanced by these other ways of knowing, supports the attitude of human supremacy, where we consider humans the most important and supreme, and that everything is here for our good, for our manipulation, our benefit, our plundering, our control. This is a situation we find ourselves in. That's why this way of knowing is so important. I consider it my environmental activism to teach meditation, because what I want is to help us all arrive, including me, arrive more intimately into life and see our deep interbeing with this world. And we get this through our sense experience. Remember back to the beginning of the talk when I was talking about that. I think this is one of the ways out for our species. One of the things that gives me hope, to know these other ways of being that are more connected, more felt, not separated out. And that can help us lead a life of respect and appreciation and coexistence and great, great care. And that's what we need right now. And ethics of respect and compassion for all beings. I was going to say living beings, but I'm going to go beyond just living beings, because some people wouldn't consider a plant sentient, but plants, respect for plants and respect for minerals and rocks and mountaintops and all beings. So these more intimate ways of knowing, they can be a way that we can save our planet, we can save our communities. It's the same thing on, a societal level, the societal problems that we're having. It's the same kind of dominion and control and needing more intimate connection so the heart can respond with care. So we start by saving ourselves. We start by learning within ourselves how to fully inhabit our bodies in this world, our senses in this world. We reclaim this through our meditation practice. We reclaim our capacity to feel and to sense, to be embodied, and to let our hearts be touched by the world, making room for the world within our hearts and for our hearts within the world. Kind of like Dogen was pointing towards, this kind of interconnection with our own hearts and with the world. And so it starts out with over and over again, we come out of the trance of the cognitive mind and reconnect with the breath and the body sitting here and hearing and smelling and tasting and seeing and feeling, sensing the body. We learn to relax into the intimacy of being in touch with the truth, being in touch with ceaseless change, with uncontrollability, unmanageable life. We increase our capacity to be with this whole life, which allows us to relax. And out of that relaxation comes this connection. We don't need so much to flee to the cognitive mind in our attempts to control the world. So I have some ideas. I call it relaxing the cognitive grip. I have some concrete ideas about how we can do that. But I'm also wondering if we did talk about the possibility that you might be able to write questions, but I'm not seeing if that can actually happen or not. Let me see. Is it possible, Paul, for people to write questions they might want me to address? We have about 25 minutes left.
I believe they can, Rebecca. They can click the Q&A at the bottom of their screen, possibly.
So yeah, if there's something you really want me to talk about, something that came up as a thoughts during this talk, feel free to put them in the Q&A. I'll try to answer them. Yeah, so I'll answer them verbally if anything comes in. In the meantime, I can continue on with some of my ideas about how to relax the cognitive grip, as I call it, because that's what it feels like sometimes, doesn't it? Does to me, like the thinking mind is kind of like just doesn't want to let go, right? doesn't want to relax into this intimate connection with truth, with life. So what are some things that support our capacity to do that? Well, some of them we've been talking about. So having this anchor, home base in our embodied experience is one way. It gives us a place to start. And we can actually kind of like the puppy train the mind to come here. It gets used to it more. So we're landing in our bodies. It should be a comfortable home base. If I'm just going to check the questions. Mm-hmm. Here's one. How do you relax the mind when there's so much financial fear about the future? When I lost so much over the past year and starting all over again? Yeah, that one, that's a good question. So what we find is that when things are more uncertain, the cognitive mind goes into higher gear. And it's directly related to the wish to be able to control things. And many of you might have noticed at different periods over the last year when things were particularly intense in your own life due to COVID, perhaps, or losing so much financially, or when some political event was very intense, that the mind got very busy, more and more busy. So the first thing to do is to not condemn that, but to actually have compassion for ourselves. That's our human conditioning, that when things are uncertain, the mind kicks into high gear to try to solve the problem. And that, to a certain extent, that is useful when we have financial troubles. Of course, on some level, we do need to think about our situation. We do need to kind of stand back and make a plan. And so that is all helpful. What's not helpful, and probably what's being pointed to in this question, is when it feels obsessive, when it feels like anxiety and churning, and not so useful, but just that churning. Yeah, the cognitive grip, right? So one way is having some place that you can anchor outside of the mind. Another place, sometimes what happens is to allow the heart to feel. So sometimes a lot of what's going on in the mind is because the heart wants attention. So perhaps if there's a lot of financial stress, there's a lot of fear. And so the heart is feeling fear. And is it possible to connect with that directly in the body? And you're seeing, I'm putting my hand over my heart, right? I did that instinctively. So it's like, can we take care of the fear? But maybe putting our hand on our heart and just holding it. Oh, there's fear. Yeah. And perhaps combining that with feeling the breath and feeling our feet on the earth, so we actually can find some sense of stability within the body. Feeling our feet on the earth, feet on maybe our buttocks on the cushion, the heart. And then we can reassure the heart, you know what, I am going to think about this and I'm going to come up with a plan. So there it is, using the cognitive mind, right? It's useful, it's helpful. But what can also be helpful is to be able to step out of it you could say, the drama of the mind into something simple, like your hand on your heart, your feet on the ground. This is one of the things that this direct connection offers, is simplicity. A rest, we're looking for rest from that constant churning of the mind, of the cognitive mind. It's like, oh, okay. See if anything else on my list. Oh, and then nourishment. When things are really intense, using our sense experience to nourish. So we can use our sense experience to go out in nature and look at the flowers. We've had daffodils. Some you guys are all probably way ahead of us, but we've had daffodils now for about a month, and they keep like new ones come up with different colors. And so I take the time to look at them and to take in their beauty, which is this kind of nourishment, or to take in the beauty of the thrush's song. What nourishes us? Because even though right now there's lots of financial fear, for example, financial troubles, there's still outside this beautiful spring bursting into being. Right now, I call it the spring foliage season. You know, we have fall foliage season here, but we have spring foliage season and the different kinds of greens. I remember going to this time of year, or maybe like a week earlier, going to, yeah, because you guys are ahead of us in Ohio, but going to Ohio and seeing the colors. So nourishment, nature nourishment is really important. Using this direct connection in nourishing ways, going towards what's pleasant and what soothes the system. It's easier to connect with pleasant, right? So connecting with pleasantness, and then that can give us some strength that can help us to, to then do what we need to do. So one question was the name of the Indigenous biologist, Robin Kimmerer. She wrote Braiding Sweetgrass, and it's actually become quite a mainstream bestseller because she's amazing. There was another question, was the beginning of the quote, "The head has no answers, and the heart has no questions." That is, I have a lot of, here we go. That's Richard Wagamis. The overwhelming awe and wonder we feel teach us more than we can ever glean or come to know of things. This is pointing towards a little bit like what I was pointing towards before, like even just looking directly at a daffodil. There's so much awe and wonder in this amazing thing. The overwhelming awe and wonder we feel teach us more than we can ever glean or come to know of things. In the presence of that wonder, the head has no answers and the heart has no questions. Here's a great one. How do we make big life decisions like jobs, moving, relationships from intuitive place when habits of thinking have determined these decisions in the past? And where should decisions be made? Is it from our intuitive awareness? Yeah. So with big decisions, big life decisions, in some ways, I think of it as using both capacities. So there is some benefit to thinking out pros and cons and consequences of one decision or another. But what they found, I remember reading some research that found that with the most complicated decisions, that isn't actually how people made the best decisions, now that I'm remembering it. And that the best decisions were made from something more like intuition, because intuition actually has access to all kinds of levels of knowing that aren't conscious, but that are important. I just remember one time when I was young, this was even before I practiced, I was in my last year of college, and I had 3 wonderful opportunities for what I was going to do when I graduated. And I couldn't decide which one to take. So what I did is I made I chose something that symbolized each option. And then I just would put my like hand over it, and I just felt whatever images came to my mind. And I actually made the decision that way. It's like what images or what feeling I felt inside of me, and my hand was over that pile. I ultimately wound up going to Nicaragua and teaching English as a second language. And that's where I learned about meditation and how I wound up going to the Insight Meditation Society and doing a long retreat. Who knows how it all lined up, right? It's all so mysterious. But sometimes I think for those kinds of decisions, thinking does just get in the way, like you're saying. Sometimes people go on retreats and they come in with big life decisions, and my advice always to them is don't think about it. And then often at the end of the retreat, it's like they're like, oh yeah, that's what I need to do. Okay. It's just clear because in some ways you haven't been going on the same usual tracks of your mind. Ask your heart which one of the things it wants to do. Ask your heart what it wants. It's so used to being told by us what it should want. What does it want? And sometimes what looks like the best answer is not the right one for us. There was another time where I had a lot of opportunities to do it after I did this long retreat at IMS, and several opportunities came up, and they were fantastic opportunities. Somebody was going to pay for me to go to Burma and meditate there. Somebody offered me this like around the world tour of like religious sites. I turned down both of those. And I stayed at IMS on staff working in the garden. It was totally the right decision. It didn't look like the most glamorous, decision, but it was the right one. So I've been rambling. I hope some of that was helpful. Oh, here's a really important, difficult question. Would you speak about this awareness of interbeing when the biosphere is being destroyed? There's a great sadness that makes it hard to stay open to that sense of interbeing. Yeah, I work with this one a lot. First of all, we need to leave room for our hearts to grieve. There has to be some space for the heart to grieve, but it's so big. It's such a big grief that usually short little bits are about right. Not too much, not too deep into it because it's too big. It's actually too big to grok. But little, just like it'll happen to me sometimes when I'm meditating, sometimes when I'm not. That something will touch me and my heart will open and I'll feel the grief and I'll allow it. I'll make room for it. Sometimes I cry and then it does pass. That's how grief, you could say quote unquote healthy grief, but forgive me, that's not the best phrase. But that is how grief can manifest. It comes in waves and then we learn we can hold the waves. That we have the capacity in our hearts for that wave. And it means we're connected. It means we're part of this. That's the beauty of grief. It means we care. And then we go out and we listen to the wood thrush song. We point our attention towards what is beautiful in this world right now. It might be the wood thrush song. It might be people who are doing beautiful work to try to solve some of the environmental problems that we have right now. It might be appreciating Greta Thunberg, who, as such a young woman, has just dedicated her life to this, right? Appreciating her spunk and her unwielding tenacity, right? You can see that I'm getting happy when I think of these things. So it's really, we have to learn how to have to direct our minds both to being with what's really difficult and holding it, whether it's, financial problems or the destruction of the biosphere. We have to know how to hold the emotion of that and the truth of that. And then we have to know how to also move the attention in ways that nourish, strengthen, build our capacity, and remind us that the world isn't just narrow into one problem or problems, that the world is wider than that there's more here than that. And that the world is full of gifts and abundance for us. That's what we also discover when we become intimate and close with it. That the world is always giving to us. Can we receive those gifts? And of course, then we want to give back too. That's part of the ethics. Robin Kimmerer talks about this a lot, that when we take something, we give back. That's part of the ethics of this interbeing, this very close relationship. Good questions. Yeah. So it's almost 8:25. I think I got to most of the questions, right? Yep. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. I recognize some of the names. Good to see you guys, or not see you guys. I don't in this format, but good to see your names and know that you're there. See how we might end today. Feel like we covered some territory here. Yeah, so relaxing this cognitive grip, I did speak about it more when I was answering some of these questions. Slowing down, taking the time to look at a flower, nourishing ourselves, being willing to feel awe and wonder. Chanting can be a great support. I'm going to talk a little bit about this during the weekend, about chanting and the protections that the practice and the blessings that the practice offer us. So a little different direction than tonight, but some of the same theme. Ritual helps us to connect. Even the ritual of lighting the candle that I lighted here in front of the Buddha. Creating an ambience, an environment that feels friendly and inviting and warm. That will help us settle in. I think that's enough words for tonight. Let's I can see, I think Robert wants to maybe say a few words, but before, let's just sit for a minute together and just let the words kind of settle. Lots of words. Maybe connecting with your body and your heart, just seeing what you feel right now, how you feel, both the heart and the body. This wild, beautiful, amazing, unmanageable life. This is what the Dharma offers us to connect with. May our hearts and minds grow wide, spacious, and open, and able to include it all, so that we can be at peace, we can rest, we can know the deep truth of the boundless capacity of our own hearts and minds. Thank you for being with me tonight, with us tonight. It's been a delight to share with you. And still a chance to sign up for the retreat if you want to, or if you are already doing it, feel free if you have the chance tomorrow to just be quiet and enjoy some of the beauty around you, and you can kind of extend your retreat by one day by starting tonight. But I better turn it over to Robert. I can see that we're getting near the end of our time. Thank you.
Thank you for that talk, Rebecca. That was really wonderful. And it was so good to hear how we can balance the knowledge of the heart and the mind when generally we tend to focus on the mind. And I was looking at the painting of Bodhisattva Manjushri behind you. And Bodhisattva Manjushri is associated with wisdom and cutting through illusion. And generally, people think of, at least as far as I've heard, they often think of him, at least, as using logic to do that. But there's no reason why he couldn't use very focused intuition to cut through illusion. So I really appreciate your talk for bringing that to mind. And I also want to thank the folks who helped to put this together and run it, Paul Kotheimer and Linda Potter and Parker Buckley from here at the Dharma Center. And as Rebecca said, you can still sign up for the retreat. And if you'd like to express your thanks and make a donation to Rebecca or the Dharma Center, there's links for that we've sent out. So thank you again so much, Rebecca.